Hey folks, in case you missed it, the single barrels have started rolling in. Both barrels of the Jack Daniel's Single Barrel Barrel-Proof Rye are available through Hudson Wine Market, with direct links in my social media pages and Instagram bio. These also went out to patrons with a special discount code. These barrels have been going so quickly that, honestly, I don't even know if there are going to be any left by the time this is posted. So if they are available and you want them, trust me, don't wait, because someone else is going to grab them first. Next up is the Barrel Rye finished in Armagnac casks. This is going live on October 2nd. This incredible pick was done in partnership with the guys at This Is My Bourbon podcast. The Timbip guys are great friends, and I'm thrilled to have this barrel come into the shop. On October 2nd, Patreon members of both podcasts will have first dibs with free shipping for Patreon supporters. No limits, no minimums, free shipping for Patreon supporters. So up your Patreon pledge now if you want to grab them before everyone else and get that free shipping code. Just want to take a quick second. Thank you so much. From the bottom of my heart, thank you to all the supporters, especially my friends on Patreon. You've put a ton of investment into the pod and the site through the years, and as these single barrels start rolling out and additional products start rolling out, I'll keep providing as many perks as possible to those who have supported me along the way and continue to join. If you're not a patron, if I was on the outside, sounds like now's the time to join. All right, enough updates. Now on to a new episode of the Whiskey Ring Podcast. Hello, everyone. Welcome to a new episode of the Whiskey Ring Podcast. Today, we're taking a break from talking to distillers and producers to talk to one of the most influential writers, critics, researchers of our, I was going to say whiskey, but really spirits movement in the last few decades, and that is Mr. F. Paul Pacult. So, Paul, welcome on.
Oh, David, thank you so much for having me. It's an absolute delight to be with you.
Well, and of course, Paul has earned many accolades over his career. Just for the sake of time, I will skip them for now, but they will be included in the show notes. And honestly, if you go to fpaulpacult.com, check out the accolades, the books, the many resources that he has available. I encourage you to do so. I took advantage of that for research for this episode, and you'll see it come through as we go through. So my first question for you starts from where this interview stemmed from. So Fred Minnick made a post a few weeks ago about announcing that the Ultimate Spirits competition, one of your babies, will be ending. And so I just wanted to start there, to ask the obvious, why stop now?
I hate running in place. I've always, my career, I think, David, has been fruitful because I've never been satisfied with staying in the same place all the time. I always look for new adventures. I always look for new challenges, really. I need to be challenged in order to be at my best. And I've found out that for me to be doing the same thing over and over and over again, it just doesn't work for me. It works for some people, and I certainly acknowledge that. And I say, God bless. But for me, that's never been an objective. The reason that we decided to let go, well, several reasons. One, I had been running competitions for basically a quarter of a century. I co-founded San Francisco World Spirits Competition with Anthony Dice Blue in 2000. Ran that as judging director for, I guess, 10 years. And then I left San Francisco. In fact, I left all competitions that I was either judging director or a panelist or a panel captain in 2009 in order to start Ultimate Beverage Challenge. And the first few years we did cocktails, we did wine as well, because for a long time I was a wine writer, a wine journalist and a wine judge, and worked at a winery for 10 years. So my love of wine continues to this day. But we ended up where we really focused on spirits just because of the explosion of spirits in the marketplace. So we decided that really our most important objective was to focus on what was happening in the marketplace now, and that was spirits. So we did that for 14 years. To be honest, the partners, my wife, Sue Woodley, David Talbot, and I figured we'd probably have a good run if we did 10 years. And again, knowing my personality, not to keep repeating myself, we ended up doing 14 years because it was a wonderful run, and every year was bigger than the last and more successful than the last. But it was just time to move on after a quarter of a century of running competitions. I just felt it was time to move aside, let some of the other people who are doing it have their time in the sun. So that's one of the reasons. The other reason was our consulting business, meaning Sue, my wife and partner, and I, has just exploded over the last dozen years. And so we decided to spend more time helping distillers, producers, marketers with developing or creating new products for the marketplace. We felt that was really more important right now than doing a competition. It wasn't an easy decision, David. I'll be honest. It really took myself and my partners. We took 3 months to really talk this out. How we wanted to see the future, how we wanted to see the legacy of Ultimate Spirits Challenge in particular. But we always came to the same conclusion. Let's go out on a really high note with more entries than ever before this year. Let's go out on a high note and leave some room for some of the other very good people who are doing competitions right now. And then, so now Sue and I are focusing almost exclusively on helping producers with their products. And I mean, I don't have to tell you, I mean, my God, you're on the front line of this. You know how many people are getting involved, not just with whiskey, but with spirits across the board. And oftentimes the learning level is quite low when it comes to understanding, one, what it means to produce a spirit, and two, how to get it into the marketplace and be successful with it in such a crowded marketplace right now. So those are the two primary reasons why we let go. And it was just time. It was just time.
Was there any thought to handing the reins over to like a new generation to continue it? Or was it really letting the other competitions take their time in the spotlight?
Well, we have had offers to buy it. And we were unanimous in our agreement that no, we weren't going to. We were going to leave entirely. And yeah, we could have made a lot of money on a sale, but money isn't it's not our motivation. Our motivation is integrity and our reputations. If someone would have taken it over and not run it to the absurdly high standards that we established, that would reflect badly on us eventually, because somehow my name would always be associated with it. And to me, my uppermost concern since I've been a journalist since the late 1970s has always been to have a reputation with impeccable integrity and to do things right. And so you never know where something is going to go. If you let somebody else at the steering wheel, they may drive it off the road. And we didn't want to be involved in that. The money wasn't important to us at all. We just wanted to end on a very high note, which we've done, move on to other things that we've done in the past.
Fair enough. And to go back to the beginning and the impetus for starting the competition, first at Ultimate Beverage Challenge and then as Ultimate Spirits Competition, you've told the story, the infamous 10 to 12 overproof rums in Barbados, as a moment where you're like, we need to do better in competitions. Now that happened in the mid 2000s, and then you're starting this competition in 2009, 2010, and now 14 years later, ending it. Now, between, let's say, when it started and ended, how do you see the spirits competition landscape has changed?
I think a lot of people, well, what we did find out, certainly mostly through judges of other competitions, is that a lot of the competitions basically were parroting what we did, because I'm so strict in how I judge things. And this goes back to starting the Spirit Journal in 1991, where I always held myself to very strict standards on evaluation and analysis. I have an extremely, some people have called it insane regimen. But that's something that works for me. I come from a family in the Midwest. We were very structured. It was a very tight-knit group. Everybody worked hard, but integrity was always the most important thing. So the reason that I had left San Francisco, the reason that I had resigned from all of the different competitions I was part of, was because I felt there was a better way to skin the cat. Mm-hmm. And my way of doing things, I basically mirrored how I set up our regimen for judging with panels, the same way that I keep a very close rein on myself when I'm doing reviews, when I'm doing analysis for our clients. Mm-hmm. I keep a very strict regimen, and I took that regimen and basically made it adaptable to have a multi-panel group do it, and it worked. And then as time went on, and judges from other competitions would come to me and say, "Gee, we know how you do things. We really respond to how you do things." Because you respect the judges, you don't overtax the judges, you don't give them flights of 40 bourbons in one flight, which unfortunately some competitions do. And so I just heard from judges, from other people participating, how things were going in other competitions. And it pretty much made me realize that, again, integrity is the most important thing. Honesty, independence are the most important things. So I set up regimens with the judges where no panel would ever have more than 6 products in one flight. The flights would be tightly controlled so that it was direct competition between like with like products, which is the truest way to judge anything. But we also would take days off. Because we had our own facility, we had this great luxury, David, of time was not a problem for us. Most of the other competitions today, and again, I'm not criticizing what other people do, and I really want people to know that. I'm just drawing differences. But most other competitions rent space from a hotel event space or a restaurant, so there's a time limit on it. With our competitions, we had the property, so we didn't worry about time. We could do as long as we wanted, and this is why we would often take 2 months to do Ultimate Spirits Challenge, because I wanted to give the judges the type of environment that, one, was clinical, but also was comfortable and friendly. I didn't want it to be in a hotel event space. I didn't want it to be in the back room of a restaurant. I wanted it to be a comfortable space so that people felt they wanted to be there, and the judges weren't overtaxed. And I thought, happy judges will give us better results. They'll give us truer results. If judges are grumbling that, here's another flight of 36 gins, and we've just gone through 120 spirits already today, I don't want to be one of those distillers of the gins having my product judged by that panel if they're all disgruntled about it. So to me, job one was to create a system and an environment where the judges wanted to be there. I would never have them taste more than 45 spirits in a day. So yeah, we'd only judge from 10 in the morning till 3 in the afternoon, but then people would go home and live the rest of their lives. And they'd come back the next day, or they'd have a day off, and then they'd come back totally refreshed. So these are things that we did that I hear now are being copied by other competitions, and I'm actually glad for that. I'm happy, and I feel safe in kind of leaving this arena, because I think people, the organizers, have gotten the message perhaps that treat your judges well, be realistic with what you expect from them. Don't burn out their palates within the first 45 minutes of the day, and you'll do better. So, look, if other competitions show respect to their judges and respect to the process, then I think we'll be fine.
Understanding that many competitions, as you say, have been parroting to one extent or another the USC for really since its inception, but certainly in the last few years. As you close down for the final time, do you feel that any of them hew close enough to your standard that you would see it as kind of a lineage? Or another way to answer that question would simply just be, with the USC no longer happening, which competitions would you look to as the higher standard ones?
I'd look to Fred's. I'd look to Ascot, because I believe, I've known Fred for a while. I really respect what he does. I think he has real integrity. And knowing Fred, I think he would really, to him, it would be important to do things right. So I would look to Ascot. Yeah. The others, to be honest, David, I don't know enough about. I would hear dribs and drabs from different judges wanting to judge with us because they were a little bit disconcerted with how the process was going on with other competitions. And I don't want to be in the business of denigrating what other people do. I just don't. I would just rather just say my hope is that the other competitions would either call, which I'd be happy to explain what we did if they would want to know. Why not? The beautiful thing, the reason that I've stuck around this business for so long is because I think the people are terrific in the beverage alcohol business, as well as the hospitality business. They're just the nicest people that I know of. And I'm always so happy to be in with my peers, either in a restaurant or a bar or at a press tasting. They're just great people. And I think they get the fact that integrity and reputation are so important. So, if somebody wants to call us and just say, look, can you give us some guidance on what you did and why you guys were so successful, I'd be happy to tell them. Absolutely. I think it's all about sharing. Beverage alcohol, when you look at the whole history of beverage alcohol, it's all about community. The reason that there are bars and taverns is because that was community, and it was community sharing ideas. It was community hearing the news of the day. It was, talking about a wedding and how to do a wedding. It was all about community. And I think, as I say, the reason I've been around this gig for, since 1973 is because I've always loved the community of beverage alcohol and of bars and restaurants, the hospitality industry, because it really is a communal transfer of information and good feeling and honesty. So yeah, I if somebody wants to call and say, how do you do it? I'd be happy to tell them, I'm out of it now and I'm doing other things, and, I'm writing other books and I'm consulting. And so I'd be happy to share what we learned, because it was a learning process for us too, David. I mean, I think, my 10 years with San Francisco was very good. And because, I appreciated the fact that Anthony Dias Blue had enough confidence in me as a spirits guy, because at the time he was not. He was strictly a wine journalist and competition person. The fact that he trusted me to get San Francisco going was very nice. And I'm proud of what we did there. And to this day, it's the number one, without any question, the number one competition in the world. So I think it's just, I don't want to see any discord if possible. I believe in communication, and that's the beauty of beverage alcohol, is it's all about communication.
And to back that up as well, I'm thinking back, of course, to my interview with Dr. Edward Slingerland, who wrote about drunk and beverage alcohol, both unintentional and intentional, in its creation, and how we grew as a civilization. So I'll have to re-listen to my own episode on that, because it's a fascinating conversation to have. But I wanted to, with that segue, jump into your own history in writing, which, as you said, started as a wine writer in 73. Right. Is that correct?
Yeah, well, actually, what happened was I had attended UC Berkeley in the late 60s. And after that, I moved up to Santa Rosa in Sonoma County, because I loved Northern California in particular. Growing up in Chicago, it was just such a vast departure from the Midwest, being in Northern California, particularly the Bay Area, and which I still have great friends in. And I had no design, even though my major was journalism, David. I had no design at that point. I was still 22 or so. I didn't know what I was going to do. So I moved up to Santa Rosa, got married, and got a job at what at the time was Sonoma Vineyards, Rodney Strong Vineyards today. And but basically, Rod hired me to be the landscaper, because I did landscaping on and off to help support myself when I was at university. And so I did that, and then I just got into writing. Started writing probably, I would guess, in the late 70s. And I'd send articles off to different magazines and they'd get accepted. And I would think, hey, this is easy. No problem, send these off and my name's in print. There you go. And you get a check for a couple $100. This is a kind of a nice gig. And eventually I was writing quite a bit. And Rod called me into his office one morning and he said, you're a really good writer. Unfortunately, you're such a good writer, you're really of little use to me anymore at the winery, I have to tell you. And I was kind of, he was a real mentor to me. And the depth of his friendship was such that he could say to me, go do what you should be doing. You're not meant to be here any longer. But what he said before I left, and to be honest, I was kind of hurt at the time. He said, don't stay in California, because everybody with a sharp pencil in California at the time considered themselves a wine writer. So he said, go to New York. And he said, here's the caveat. Don't call me until you're writing for the New York Times. You're that good, but I don't want to hear from you till you're writing for the New York Times. So with my tale uh, uh, beneath my legs. I drove across country, got established in New York, worked for a wine store, Morel and Company, again, wonderful mentor, Peter Morel. And I started writing, and I was writing for a lot of people at the time. I mean, 5, 6 different publications. And I started a wine school, and in my loft in Tribeca in Manhattan, and at an advanced class in 19 well, it must have been 88. At the end of 1988, 3 guys from the New York Times were attending this advanced class. And after the class, they came up to me and said, we really love your writing. You're really irreverent. You're not afraid to use shit, hell, and damn. And we just love it because it's so different. Do you want to write for the New York Times? And my first thought is, who do I have to kill? And then my second thought was, guys, I know Frank Pryal. He's the best wine writer of this generation, undoubtedly, the wine columnist for the Times. And I said, there's no way that I would do an end run on Frank. And they said, no, we're not talking about writing about wine. We want you to write about Scotch whiskey. And after I regained consciousness, I admitted to them, I just said, look, guys, I have to be honest with you. I'm a wine geek. I don't know anything about spirits. Scotch whiskey, is that from Scotland? I mean, I don't know. Mm-hmm. And they said, well, do some on-the-job training, but do you want this job or not? So what do you say to the New York Times when you're in your late 30s and you're writing for a lot of different publications? But it's the New York Times. So I said, okay, sign me up. But I said, I will tell you right now, I don't know anything about spirits. I don't know anything about whiskey. I don't know anything about Scotch whiskey. And they said, we'll learn, because this project will be for the Sunday magazine about a year from now. And we wanted to give you enough lead time so that you could get the information and write a great article for us. So that was it. And that changed my life forever, David, because after the Times gig, after that appeared in the Sunday magazine, first Sunday in December 1989, that was it. Changed my life forever.
So, and starting as on the first hand as a wine writer in the 70s, and then as a spirits writer focusing on Scotch whiskey in the late 80s, there are 2 points there that historically have a lot of value, which is 76 Judgment of Paris for wines, and then particularly, I guess, starting in the 70s, but particularly in the 80s, the rise of single malts as a real serious category for people to look for. Leaning more into the first one, the Judgment of Paris moment, which the wine community will know, but to do kind of a TLDR version of it, California wines were put against French wines in Paris, and the California wines beat them in blinds. And it was really a watershed moment. And so, turning to the spirit side and the whiskey side in particular, over your years of writing, have you seen any points that you would consider kind of Judgment of Paris-esque moments for whiskey?
Yesterday, with Drinks International naming Michter's as the most respected whiskey in the world, that I thought one was totally deserved by Michter's and Joe Magliocco and Andrea Wilson. This is a great brand, and I'm really delighted that it was recognized as, I believe, the first American whiskey to be so honored by Drinks International. That was yesterday. Um, I'd point to 1984, David,
Mhm.
as the start of the real change in American whiskey. And that's when Elmer T. Lee said to himself, um, this single malt Scotch thing is growing here in the mid 80s, but I want people to know around the world that American distillers can make just as great whiskeys as the Scots. And so he released Blanton's single barrel bourbon. I think that was a real game changer. Um, 6 years later, Booker No releases the um, small batch collection, Booker's, Baker's, Basil Hayden's, and Knob Creek. Another true watershed moment where uh, the conversation started changing in two ways, actually. Through the 80s, as you so rightly point out, 70s and 80s, wine was the darling of the media. Wine was the darling of retailers, on and off premise people. And as you say, in part it was because of the Paris event with Stephen Spurrier. But also, I would point out, it was also because of the 1982 Bordeaux vintage, which was a phenomenal vintage. And it put Robert Parker on the map. And with Parker and the Wine Spectator in particular taking off during that decade of the 80s, the conversation mostly centered, for beverage alcohol purposes, around wine and the rise of California, the glory of the Grand Cru, the classified Bordeaux's, and then little increments during the 80s. Scotch single malt was becoming much more of a presence in the marketplace. But to be honest, when the Times came to me and said, "Do you want to write about Scotch whiskey for the Sunday magazine?" And I said, "Yeah, I do, but I don't know anything about it." And they said, "Well, learn." There was nothing out there. There was no information out there for me to look to. The only book that was out there was the Grossman's Guide to Wine and Spirits. That was it. And to be honest, that was really dated even then in the late 80s. So there was nothing. So it was truly, and the Times guys were absolutely right when they said it's going to be on the job training, because they knew there was no information out there. So fortunately, because the Times was making, they were very profitable at the time, they sent me over to Scotland for a couple of weeks, basically, and just said, learn as much as you can and come back with 5,000 words. And so I did. But really, it took a while for spirits to gain traction. And so watershed moments, I would definitely point to the rise of single malts, slow but steady in the 80s, Elmer T. Lee releasing Blanton's, and Booker No releasing the small batch collection. I think those things really changed the conversation a lot. One funny story I have to tell you about when I was part of the wine writers circle in New York in the 80s, and somehow at one of the meetings after I had agreed and signed a contract with the Times, somehow word got out that I was writing for the Times. And at one meeting of the wine writers circle, Alex Bespeloff, who I had just was kind of a mentor, he was kind of the leader of the pack. And Alex came up to me and he said, "Here you're going to be writing about whiskey for the New York Times." And I said, "Yeah, I mean, fantastic opportunity, Alex." And he said, "I have to tell you, I think this is really going to hurt your wine writing career." And I said, let the chips fall where they may, but I really want to do this. And he said, "Paul, whiskey is brown." And I just said, "Yep, it certainly is. The more I'm tasting it now, yeah, it definitely is brown. No question about that, Alex. So, but I mean, it was a slog. It was not easy getting information for me to write. Um, but then after the Times Sunday Magazine article, cognac producers started contacting me. Armagnac producers started contacting me. Vodka, gin producers started, because they suddenly saw an opening for the very first time where a major publication stuck its neck out and started writing in their Sunday magazine about spirits. And that's where I am today. It's all because of that one question. Do you want to write about Scotch whiskey for the New York Times?
And I think it's worth noting that in that time period, as you say, I mean, this is before emails, before most uh, producers had anything remotely related to a visitor's center or anything like that. Occasionally, you'd see people like Elmer or Booker going on tour and touting
Yeah.
the products, but they were very much just they were trying to push product. It was not an era where they were yet celebrities as we have now
Mm-hmm.
in the
Mm-hmm.
industry. So you spoke a little bit about, you were sent to Scotland and to learn, and because this was a period before all of that was available, before the information was available, before easy access was available. Uh, were you, I guess, what methods were you able to use to get in with them? Is it a matter of showing up on the doorstep and saying, "Hey, I work for the I'm writing for the New York Times, and I want to thing"? Was there more dialogue than that? And that can be for Scotch, but also for subsequent spirits that you wrote about.
What I found on that first trip, um, that Time sent me on, and they said, go for 2 weeks, go to as many distilleries as you can. Don't be afraid to say who you're writing for. That may help give you some entree. To be honest, that and first trip, David, I was visiting like 2 distilleries a day. And this was grain distilleries as well as single malt, because I really wanted to cover it all, because I didn't know if this was going to be a one of situation with the Time. So I didn't think at the time that I'd end up writing for the Sunday magazine for 17 years. I mean, it was the furthest thing from my mind. So I wanted to get as much in that 2 week period as possible. So I was doing 2 distilleries a day, one in the morning, one in the afternoon. At every stop, I didn't even have to say I was writing for the New York Times. They were so happy to see an American journalist who, I, this was some sort of an occasion, because no one was writing about spirits in the US at that point. Nobody. I was it. So the fact that this American was coming over to learn, and I was really upfront. I would tell them, I don't know any, teach me as much as you can within this next 2 hours. And they loved it. And they would call ahead to the next place and say, Paul Pacult's coming. He's do what you can. He really wants to learn. So I was welcomed with open arms and nothing but enthusiasm and the most incredible hospitality, which I will never forget. Now, I've been to Scotland 29 times since that point, but I remember that first trip so much because I was so humbled by the fact that they were just so lovely and gave me as much information as they possibly could within the time allotment that we had. But because there was, as you say, there was nothing. And so it was, but in a way, I think it was actually good. I feel blessed that there was nothing, because I had to do all my own research. There was no Google. And, where today you could write an article and never leave your room. Do the research just from what's online. To me, there's nothing that beats being in the field and learning. Nothing. And that's, again, not to say that, well, Google isn't a great tool, or that other books that are out now are great tools. I'm not saying that at all. It's all good, because it's just more information, and information is wonderful. But I feel lucky because the territory was so virgin at the time that I had no alternative but to go out in the field and learn. When the time said, okay, let's do something on cognac and let's do something on French brandy, I'd go to France and learn on the ground from all these great producers. It was a different world. It was a different way of gaining the information that I needed to write something that that made sense and that was coherent. Which sometimes, I had trouble with coherency, but it was a great way for me to learn, because I was on the ground, I was on site, I was talking to the people who made this shit. I'd talk to the guys in the warehouse. I'd go to Speyside cooperage and learn how to raise a barrel. I'd go to France and learn and walk through the vineyards and harvest grapes for cognac. I would do all of that stuff. I don't know if you can do that today. I really don't. I guess you can. I don't know the level of energy of spirits writers today. I really don't. I mean, and again, it's not a criticism. I just don't know. I would say a guy like Tony Sachs, he goes out in the field and he learns, and so I think there still are some spirits journalists who have that understanding that the best way to do things is to go on site, talk face to face to the people, and do it with respect, because they're all working hard. This is their legacy you're writing about. So, but treat them with respect, and enjoy that they're giving you that time. I remember in 1994, maybe something like that, I was starting to write about American whiskeys more, because I had toured with Booker No. We introduced the small batch collection around the country. And so I was very psyched about American whiskey at the time. And this is before the big boom now. And so I made an arrangement. I was in Kentucky, and I said, gee, I'd really love to talk to Elmer T. Lee, and at what was then the Ancient Age / George T. Stagg Distillery. It hadn't become Buffalo Trace yet. And his secretary said, okay, Elmer is really busy. He can see you for 30 minutes. And I thought, great, that's enough. I just want to say hello and just talk to him, interview him quickly, and I'm out of there. I won't take up any more of his time. So I get there, and I meet Elmer in one of the warehouses. And so we're going around. I'm very aware of the time, because it was always important for me to be respectful of the people that I interviewed. I never wanted to overstay my invitation. So I'm kind of looking at my watch, David, and I'm thinking, geez, I'm here for an hour now, and they said 30 minutes because Elmer's so busy. And, as we hit the hour and a half, I said to Elmer, you were only supposed to give me 30 minutes, Elmer, and I feel like I'm really dominating your time. I know you've got a lot of other stuff to do. And he went, oh, no, God, let me take you to Warehouse H, because that's where we have Blanton's. So we'd go over where I was with him for 3 hours. And that was the type of experience that I had. And that's why, to this day, I love going to distilleries. And even if I know the process now in and out, even though one distillery can sometimes mirror the image of another one, I always pick up something. Some distiller, some woman that will be in charge of the warehouse will give me some little nugget of information that I've never heard before, that I've learned, that I go, oh yeah, that makes sense. That makes sense. Thanks for giving me that information for my readers. So it's all about that communication. It's all about the freedom to say to somebody, okay, well, how do you do this exactly? And what is the process? And why do you do this? And why do you use that type of barrel as opposed to this type of barrel? You can't do that on Google. You can only do that if you're there on site with the person right in front of you who has the answer.
This month's Impact Spotlight is on Nichnine. Founded by Annabelle Thomas, Nichnine has a pioneering approach to spirit making, putting innovation and sustainability at the forefront. Through Nichnine, Annabelle seeks to change the way the world thinks about whiskey from Scotland, and to create a whiskey which could exist in harmony with our planet and its inhabitants. Nichnine has created a spirit with exceptional body and sweetness, showcasing their smooth and elegant house style. This is achieved through a combination of sourcing high-quality organic Scottish barley, gentle fermentation and distillation processes, and maturation in a combination of 3 carefully selected cask types: ex-American whiskey casks, STR, shaved, toasted, and recharred casks that held red wine, and a small amount of Oloroso sherry casks. The result is flavors of lemon sherbet, juicy stone fruits, and spiced rye bread. This whiskey is set to disrupt the industry through Nichnine's commitment to sustainability and creative approach to distilling. With an uncompromising focus, the small team of eco-conscious drinks fanatics also dedicate 10% of their spirit production to trialing different yeasts not commonly found in whiskey distilling, all on their journey to seek out and find new flavors in their whiskey making. If you're a longtime listener, you know how interested I am in whiskeys and distilleries like this, and how excited I am that Impex is now bringing it stateside. Annabelle will be visiting Chicago for Whiskey and Barrel Night on October 25th, and will be hosting special masterclasses featuring the key components of Nichnine, along with their core organic single malts. These tastings will also include a sneak peek of Quiet Rebels Gordon. Only 630 bottles of the special one-time-only release will be coming to the States, so it's a release and an event you won't want to miss. Nichnine Organic Single Malt is currently on its way to specialty retailers across the U.S. For more information and questions on where to buy, please contact the Impex Beverages office at office@impexbev.com and follow on social media to never miss a release. The Whiskey Ring podcast is proudly sponsored by Impex Beverages. I agree. And obviously in the past few years with COVID and with travel restrictions, I've had to adapt it just a little bit. But if we expand the premise to speaking to the people who are doing the work, as you're saying, if you can't be on the ground with them, just speaking to the people and saying, hey, why are you using this barrel? Why are you using ISC versus, your own cooperage or Adirondack or Barrowmill?
Right.
These subtle nuances are what make these spirits different and interesting. And there, so I have one more question on this topic that that just came to me, which was simply when the New York Times comes to you in 88 to have you start writing in 99 about spirits, or about Scotch, I should say. Did anyone ever tell you why they chose, basically why then? What was happening then that said, we need to start writing about Scotch?
That's a really good question that no one has ever asked me before, all the podcasts I've done. Yeah, I think the Times saw they were watching as to what was happening in the marketplace. And actually, David, the people who approached me were people from the sales team, not necessarily the editorial. That I worked with later, the editorial team. But the 3 guys, Rich Calandria and his 2 cohorts, they were from the sales team. And I tend to think that they were seeing in the marketplace what their advertisers at what restaurateurs, what liquor retail stores were talking to them or whispering in their ear. They, I think, saw that Scotch whiskey was up and coming. And you yourself had mentioned it, how in the 80s, single malts were beginning to gain traction in the U.S. marketplace. Unquestionably, that was the case. But I think the Times were ahead of the curve in that they saw there's some real potential here. Let's have this guy write this article. let's see where it lands in terms of the readership. Will the readership respond to it? They asked me to go to Scotland, come back with 5,000 words for the Sunday magazine. And I came back and I submitted 10,000 words. And I did that because I was so jazzed. I was so enthusiastic and totally excited about this subject of Scotland and Scotch whiskey that I way overwrote. And I submitted the 10,000 words, and I hadn't heard anything for about 3 weeks from the Times. And I thought, I screwed up. My big chance, and I way overwrote, and now they're trying to figure out what the hell are we going to do with this thing. So I called the editor and I said, Tom, I'm so sorry that I overwrote some. And he said, what are you talking about? And I said, well, I haven't heard anything. I don't know if you like it, if you hate it. He said, we're passing it around the office. It's fantastic. Can you do 2,000 more words? So I did. So I added a few sidebars. It ended up being 2,000 words. And it ended up being a 28-page section in the Sunday magazine. And the readership went nuts. And that's why the Times and said, look, we got to sign you up. Let's do 3 more in 1990. And let's see where this thing goes. You want to write about cognac? Huh? Let's go. We'll send you to France. And so that was it. But it just, I mean, nobody, to be honest, I don't think even the Times had expected the reaction that they got from that first 28-page special section. I didn't know. I mean, I was just happy that I was in the New York Times, and I figured if, now at least I could call Rod Strong. So after he had said, do not call me until you're writing for the New York Times. So now I felt at least I could call Rod and say, hey, boss, guess what?
And at that time too, I'm just thinking, and promise last thing, and then I'll move on to the next topic, which is that at that exact time as well, if you're coming, if you were approached by the sales department, these are also people who likely would have seen the first bottlings of what at that time would have been called Johnny Walker Oldest, that later became Johnny Walker Blue label.
Correct.
Which, even today is still seen as a status symbol in an office or something like that. But at that time would have been, even as a blend, it would have been a status symbol. So I can just imagine some of them seeing that in some of their friends' offices and thinking, this is something that's popping up in high-end offices.
Yeah.
We need to write about this. So just something to think about.
And Johnny Walker Blue was the brainchild of James Espy.
Right.
A legendary figure in British spirits world. I mean, and he saw the future. I mean, no question.
Mm-hmm. And now, as much as we talk about single malts, blends rule the roost in terms of sales, in terms of marketing. That's right. So that can be a whole other tangent, though. So I'm gonna, so I wanted to spend some time on your, of course, your reviewing system. You spoke earlier about how you developed it, that you have a very specific regimen you've handled over the years, and you actually spell it out quite well on your website. So I won't spend the time now on it, but I encourage people to look at the website again to really see what is the process that Paul Pacult will use to evaluate a spirit. There are elements that I realized I use in my own evaluations, some that I don't. I've definitely done more than 6. I try not to, because I agree with you, it's just too much. But other than that, the main points to hit are how to do it, how to taste, how to smell. So I encourage people to look at that. But I wanted to dig a little deeper and talk about let's start with scoring, I guess. So when you first spoke with Mark Gillespie, this was back in 2012 on WhiskyCast, and you've been on it there a couple of times. So this is, I think, your first interview there. Mark admitted that he'd been accused of being a high scorer. overall. So scores tending to be higher than, let's say, a normal bell curve. And his counter to that was simply that, well, I get sent good stuff. I'm not getting sent everything. I'm getting sent good stuff. So
Right.
the higher scores are organic. It's not bias. It's just what they are. So within that context, the first question I want to ask you was, for your own spirit reviewing, do you taste and rate everything that gets sent to you?
Pretty much. Yeah, pretty much. And the reason is I always discover something new. Part of the luxury, I mean, Sue figured out about 2 years ago that I've reviewed about 33,000 spirits since 1989, of all categories. But and if I say that to somebody, they say, well, what, have you stopped now? And nope, nope. Why? Because I always learn something. And, I never, and I say this in my book, New Kindred Spirits, I never would consider myself the final arbiter on this subject. Never. I think there's so many good voices out there right now. Plus, I also feel, and I'm not being disingenuous here, David, but I also feel, even after all these years, I'm always learning. This is such a huge, complex, historically important subject, beverage alcohol. And Dave Wondrich, my good friend Dave Wondrich, and I have talked about this many times, how Dave, being the epitome of cocktail historian, and also a tremendous palate for spirits, and me being the spirits guy, we've often talked about how, even with all the tasting that we've done together, apart, it's just an amazing experience when you taste a whiskey and you go, whoa, man, I've never tasted anything like that before. And where did that come from? That was a thunderbolt. So I'm always encouraged that I will never go to something and taste it and evaluate it and go, yeah, okay, been there, done that. Very rarely does that happen. And I think it comes down to, I'm so strict with the regimen. I just taste from 8:30 in the morning to 11:30. That's it. I'll only do 6. I'll only do one category. I don't mix categories. But I learn something every morning. I will learn something new. And I think that's really, to me, it shows the remarkable complexity of what distillation and often maturation in oak, what these two processes do to create something that even I am going, wow, where did that come from? And hats off to that particular distiller or warehouse manager, because they saw something that was really unique and just, I haven't tasted it before. So that's why I keep tasting. So I have, probably about 40, yeah, I'd say probably about 40 whiskeys, spirits, rums, tequilas to taste over the next few weeks. But it's an adventure. It truly is an adventure. Plus, now, I mean, as you know, as well as anyone, this is the age of experimentation. Mm-hmm. And the fact that you have all these very creative people doing things with different barrels, marrying different types of spirits, marrying rum and whiskey. I mean, who would have thought of that in the late 1980s, early 1990s? Nobody. But now we have this wonderful golden age, and I truly believe this is a golden age right now that we're all the beneficiaries of spirits, experimentation. Sometimes it doesn't work. I mean, I've been helping I can't name them, unfortunately, because of non-disclosure, but I've been helping this producer with, or this music producer with tequila. And so sending me different things from different producers, and some are just god awful. And I'd be ashamed to have his name on a bottle with that stuff. But I'm also finally finding stuff that is absolutely remarkable and so different, because I said to him, let's find a producer that does not have any additives, that doesn't believe in putting additives in, that doesn't believe in putting agave syrup, that doesn't believe in putting turbinado sugar in. Let's find that person. And so we have, and now this guy's over the moon with what we found. So it's that kind of excitement that I find, that we're living in this era of no boundaries. It's just, wow, let's experiment, let's try it. And some people, the purists. I did a book signing and a tasting a few weeks ago in New Haven, Connecticut, and somebody came up to me and said, yeah, I've been following your career forever, and it's been great. But do you think that all this experimentation is really a good idea or a bad idea? And I said, I think it's a brilliant idea. And I'm delighted that there's so many intrepid people out there who want to do different things, to bring something different to the dance than what's been brought previously. And he was, well, I still like things in the old way. And I said, well, that's your choice. It's we live in a democracy, and fantastic. But I love all the experimentation, and I really encourage distillers. Yeah, let's find something new.
And it's funny that you say that. I mean, I'm looking at my desk. It's kind of crazy at the moment, but I'm looking at the mix. I've got the Truckall Patagonian Spirit, the box of 1928. That's the whiskey Calvados Armagnac coming in. The Michter's Toasted from this year, some Spirit of Ven.
Yeah.
The stuff that's here is all boundary pushing. It's, in the case of Truckall, it's a brand new spirits category.
Mm-hmm.
And I agree. I do feel a golden age happening. Obviously, I haven't been through the previous ones, but but it feels like there is something there. But on the flip side of that, so a few weeks ago, I was speaking to Maggie Kimbrell, and she recounted a good story to me that I want to share just as part of this, which was, she assigns tastings for American Whiskey Magazine as part of her job as content editor. And sometimes she has people send spirits to her who will say, I mean, she says there's a year wait. If it's something that's time sensitive, like, really consider somewhere else. But more so, she says, my tasters are Susan Riegler and Peggy Noe Stevens. So understand that your product is going to be tasted by these two women. So keep that in mind with what you send, because we can only work with what you send. And the reason that I recount that story is, I was thinking, as you described your process, not only for your own regimen, but for how you designed the Ultimate Spirits competition, you were very open about saying you feel a responsibility to distillers, producers, to respect their product and give it its due and its time. To turn that on its head a little bit, with keeping in mind what Maggie had said, do you think, on a certain level, that producers have a responsibility to you and to other reviewers to put their best foot forward and to send products that they think should be reviewed?
Yes, except for the people I've given 1 star to with their product. But yeah, I think they should be careful with what they send.
Mhm.
a bad review doesn't do anyone any good. It really doesn't. Uh, and I have given plenty over my time. I mean, I still to this day have people who won't talk to me because I gave their product a 1 star or a 2 star, or I said something in the notes that was not very complimentary. But I also think that's the chance you take. So why not send to reviewers what you think are your best products? So yeah, I don't know if there's a responsibility to the reviewer as much as to themselves. And if they have partners, if they have stockholders, uh, I think, yeah, I think they should really think about, is this good enough to send off to Maggie, to Paul, to Tony, to whoever, to Tony Aboganim's tag uh, spirits competition. Are they good enough? Are they going to be representative of what I do and my vision as a distiller? So yeah, do they have a responsibility to us? No, I don't think so. I really don't. And I will often tell people who say, well, can I send something for review? I always tell people, or Sue will tell them the same thing. There are no guarantees. And if something is not from my promontory of vision of doing so many reviews over the years, if I don't think it lives up to that particular standard that has been set in my mind, then yeah, it's not going to get a good review. I think that's just the chance people take.
And with your rating system, which is a 5-star rating system, on the lower level, you do have an automatic 1 star, which is for when you can tell that something is spoiled, that there was bacteria in the barrel, something was really off, some fundamental flaw that obscures anything else about the spirit. But beyond that, there are, of course, 1 and 2-star reviews that didn't have that. It was just a poor product for one reason or another. When you come across those, and this kind of branches off from the previous question, when you come across those where you can tell, okay, something went wrong here, do you ask for a retasting? Do you just have a conversation with the producer, or is it, this is what they sent and that's what I have to work with?
Oh no, our policy has always been to let people know. And if they want to send another sample, because I mean, David, as you know, sometimes either in transit or there'll be a mistake made at the source. And if something is really, really off, then we will always say, we feel there's a problem here. We don't want to do this to you publicly. If you want, send us another sample. So no, we always give people that out, that exit ramp if they want. I really, I don't want to be in the business of being a brand destroyer. I really don't. I want to bring out what's good about products. But sometimes even on the second go around, it just isn't there. It's just not hitting the mark of what's been established at that categorical standard. Sometimes it's just not there. And, I would rather tell people that, so that if it's not in the marketplace yet, I'm happy to give them some advice on how either shelve it completely, get rid of it, and start from scratch, or this is how I think it can be improved. We can salvage this. So we like to give people options. I don't take joy in giving a bad review at all. Our readers, for some reason, love it when something is panned. You've experienced this. I know you have. That,
yeah, there's a Schadenfreude element going on there.
Exactly.
Sure.
I take no joy in that. I would much rather rather than give something 1 or even 2 stars, which is kind of, yeah, it's acceptable, you can drink it, but it's I I take joy in 3, 4, and 5 stars. I mean, that's where I always like to look at another reviewer. I like to see, what are they crowing about? What are they saying? Yeah, this is great. Seeing a bad review doesn't give me any joy. It really doesn't. And because, I just think I know what it takes to put a product together. I mean, I've been consulting for 20 years, so I know what the organic process is to make these products. I know how much financial commitment is involved with being a distiller, having an aging warehouse, and then having a marketing plan. It's a lot of money. It's where people's identity is. So to trash that, I hate to do it, and that's why we give people a second chance.
It's worth noting is that I have this kind of same system. If something, I use a 10-point system instead of the 5 stars. That's just the one that I adapted and adopted. And for example, if it's between 1 and 3 points out of the 10-point scale, I've started to say, let's have a conversation. This is a point where I'm going to talk to the distiller or the producer and say, okay, either maybe my palate was wrong. I taste things multiple times, so not likely, but maybe my palate was wrong, or maybe something was wrong with the batch. But let's talk about this because it's worth it. And most of the time they will have the conversation. I've only had 2 that have basically said, screw you and all that. But the other point too is, to your point about being a brand killer, or not wanting to be a brand killer is the more accurate way to put it. We know that there are brands that can take it. If you put a negative review out on this year's Michter's release of the Toasted Barrel Rye, I mean, I happen to like it, but let's say I didn't, they can handle a bad review. Heaven Hill, Buffalo Trace, Jim Beam, they can handle a bad review of a product. If, I didn't like the most recent Booker's release, other people are loving it. There's enough out there to counterbalance and to give plenty of marketing material aside from just me. But when you're dealing with a smaller brand, particularly newer ones or just very small ones that are older, one bad review from a significant reviewer can really damage the brand. And I agree with you that it's up to kind of our discretion as reviewers. Obviously, you reviewed many more things than I have and have built much more of a name so far, but there's a responsibility for us to say, do we want to put that review out there? And it's something I'm encouraging more people to do. Yes, it's on one hand, we want more readership, and you do get that with the low reviews, as you said. But I would rather have fewer readers on that particular review and focus on things that are either good or that can handle it and deal with the others on a low-key basis. That's my own pontification.
Well, no, but I agree. And to me, it goes back to somebody got into this gig and this industry probably at great expense because, like, it's $5 to $7 million. That's just the startup money for a distillery nowadays. 5 to 7 million. And that's probably at the low end anymore. So, it's a big financial commitment for most people. But also it's somebody, if they want to start a brand, it's a reflection of who they are. So there's a human element to this also, which Sue and I always take into account, that we never want to be a spoiler for a brand. We never want to hurt someone's feelings. We would prefer to just say, look, as you say, let's work on this. Maybe we can get this one out of the woods and into the marketplace in a way where you'll be happy, because it isn't the first bottle people buy, it's the second bottle. That's what makes a brand. So we're always, the reason we have pretty much cleared our decks so we could be consultants now full time is this very reason. there's so many people out there right now that need help. They need the experience of somebody who's been around the block a few times, maybe more than I'll be willing to admit, but who can give them some perspective historically and also the present time of what's in the marketplace, and does this measure up to that? I'd much rather work with somebody and have them come to a happy conclusion rather than having them think, man, did I make a mistake by getting involved in this? Did I make a mistake by mortgaging my house to start this thing? That's, I don't want to be in that business. I want to be in the business of seeing people be successful.
Absolutely. So speaking of quite successful brands, I want to transition over just for a few minutes to your most recent books. One of them being the third volume of Kindred Spirits from 2021. That one, I'll admit, I have not had a chance to get my copy. It was delayed, so I will refrain. I'll refrain anything from speaking. But having read the first two, I'm sure it's obviously up to the same quality. I know your standards, so that's not a concern at all. It's more about gives people a really good way to get into the spirit without having to spend a ton of money. You have the recommendations for where to start. Don't start with the George T. Stagg. Don't start with don't start with barrel proof, because you'll probably not going to enjoy it. And I mean, look, I tell people there was a point in my journey where Wild Turkey as a brand was too spicy for me. So I get that. You need to build up. So that's the first part. So Kindred Spirits, definitely take a look. Again, I can't speak on it personally yet. The other one that also came out in 2021 was Buffalo Barrels and Bourbon. And this was the story of what is now called Buffalo Trace Distillery. As you mentioned, had many names in the past: Ancient Age, George T. Stagg Distillery, over its years in existence. And I wanted to talk to you about that book because, number one, it's actually started a line of research for myself. I'm starting a project on Louis Rosenstiel and on Shenley, because there's not really much written about them, and which I find shocking. But the other part that I wanted to get more of your opinion on was the book itself had a certain structure. Each chapter set up as kind of a mini, as a vignette of one particular person's role in the growth of this distillery over time. So talking from everyone from Colonel E.H. Taylor to Louis Rosenstiel to Elmer T. Lee, and of course today's leader is in Harlan Wheatley, and until recently Mark Brown. And the way that it was set up actually helped me quite a bit to understand this distillery, because as you can tell, I like thinking about through people's minds and how it happened. So each one showed what this particular person brought to what is now Buffalo Trace. So the first question I want to ask you on that was, when you're approaching this project, this is the first full-length book you had written in several years, the first focus on a distillery or a company since your work on Jim Beam and then Chivas Regal.
Right.
When you're writing this, you're writing it differently than you would a review, and you're also writing it now in an age where there's so many podcasts and sites out there. So as you approached it, did you feel that you had to adjust your writing and research style from previous projects you had done?
No, it's all the same to me. The joy for me, it took me 3 years to write that book. Well, it took us, because Sue did a major job of the research. But no, I approach it the same way, David, as I did Double Scotch and American Still Life. 2 years of research where I purposely do not write, because I feel that the research period is by far and away the most important element. So we spent 2 years of doing very, very little else but being in Kentucky, looking at the archives. And then I spent a year writing it and editing it. So it was a 3-year project, pretty much in line with the previous 2 books on brands. I think the joy with this one, and I think I enjoyed writing Buffalo Barrels and Bourbon more than any of the other previous 6 books, was it surprised me. I had no idea. Our publisher and our friends at Wiley, who are just a delight. I mean, I know a lot of authors hate their publishers. We don't. We have such a good relationship with Wiley. They're just a joy to write for. But what surprised me was that I realized after 2 years of research, being in Kentucky, being on site at Buffalo Trace, walking down to where the buffalo for millennia crossed that spot on the Kentucky River, which mostly is protected by these tall palisades of limestone for much of its length. But this one low spot, and we walked down there, and there was something about it that I found. I felt like I was transported to another period. It was like a time warp, because I was picturing buffalo, millions of them crossing this spot. And that made me realize how to start the book. I had to start the book not with whiskey at all, not with the distilleries, not with all the great personalities associated with Buffalo Trace and Ancient Age and George T. Stagg distilleries, but I had to start it with buffalo. And why did they cross this spot? And secondly, why was this spot so perfect an environment to have distilleries? And so that's why the first, I think I figured 20% of the book had nothing to do with whiskey. It had everything to do with why that spot and the immigration from the colonies through the Ohio Valley to southern Indiana, to southern Ohio, to northern Kentucky. The hardships that it took, the ballsy courage that it took, these men and women, pioneers, to settle this land that was just so verdant and so full of wildlife and so great. The soil and the climate were so great for the growing of corn. I felt that was the book had to start there and to follow through the first couple of chapters that history of, first, why did buffalo cross this point? And then why did all these people from the colonies decide, hey, this is much better than the original 13 colonies, because it's wide open. Except, of course, for the indigenous peoples, who, of course, suffered the greatest tragedies of all in that movement west. But I felt that story had to be told before I could even think about talking about the first distillery that was there in 1857 or something like that, if I recall. That story had to be told properly. And I think that's what gave me the greatest joy, was figuring, gee, I never expected to be talking about this. I never expected to be talking about the schist soil types. That was so perfect for the growing of corn. I never thought about that until we did the research. And somehow, once I settled on telling that story, the rest of it just came so easily, because the personalities involved, and you named them, Albert Blanton and George T. Stagg and E.H. Taylor. I mean, these were incredible people who some of them had amazing flaws. I mean, E.H. Taylor was a very colorful guy. I mean, both negative and positive, but it just told a great story. Louis Rosenthal, this amazing businessman, a genius for business, who was a visionary, who understood during Prohibition, buy up distilleries because Prohibition is not going to last forever. And I want to be ready when Franklin Roosevelt says, okay, this is done. I want to be ready to hit the ground running the very next morning. So he bought all these distilleries. That he bought them for a song because they were available. People were happy to sell them because it was Prohibition, and they were doing nothing except for the occasional one doing some medicinal distillation. So all of these wonderful personalities that were associated with what is now Buffalo Trace, it was just so easy to write after that original change of direction for me in how I saw this story begin.
And Buffalo Trace has held a place of high esteem in your writing for many years. I think even for the few years you were writing about American whiskey before it was called Buffalo Trace, when it was still the George T. Stagg Distillery, with the change in '99. So this is kind of a difficult question to ask, and I hope you'll understand the intent behind it. After writing for many years about the products from Buffalo Trace, and with admiration and being impressed by their quality overall, in approaching this project where you're telling a story about a distillery and its history that you have already written positively about in the past to a great degree, were you concerned at all with either actual or perceived bias in the writing of the book?
Mm-hmm. Yes and no. Yes, in that I made it clear right from the introduction that when I approached Mark Brown and Amy Preskey at Buffalo Trace, who now have both, Mark has stepped back and Amy has left the company. But I was really clear with them that I would love to write this book. Our publisher is very keen on the idea, but the research can lead to maybe some different places that are different from what you perceive that story to be. But our research is, I'm going to double check, I'm going to corroborate, so it may be different. Mark Brown, to his credit, just said, run with it. We're going to open up our archives. Maybe you'll find some stuff that we don't even know about, because the archives, David, are just huge.
Yeah.
But we're going to live with it. We believe in you. We believe you're going to be fair. And if something is different from what we believe it to be, then that's great. Then we'll change our tack. So they were completely honest with me, as Sue and I were with them. They were incredibly gracious and open. I mean, David, they opened up with their archivist, Madison, at the time. I believe she's no longer with them. But Madison opened it up to us, and we spent days down there pouring through a box after box of stuff. Some of it was not here or there, wasn't germane to the outline, but much of it was. And a lot of it was very different to what they're marketing, to what their website claims, but they were okay with it. And in fact, they have been one of the biggest promoters of the book. And so I think it spoke to me a lot about character from their side, that they thought, let them get the truth out there. So, and that's why I said right at the beginning of the book, yes, I have been associated with them. I've been friends with them for a long time. On the other hand, they understand that where the research takes us, that's what we're going to write about. And that's how it was, and it was fine.
I think for me, I'm satisfied with that answer. That's because it's tough because that was the first book review that I did, and I'll send that to you separately so you can see, and I welcome your feedback on what you think about what I had thought. But overall, it was very positive on the book, and as I said, it's led to my own research, so I certainly will not turn my nose up at it.
No, I think there's always a chance that someone might see it as a marketing tool. But in our case, I think because people know Sue and me so well after all these years, they know that we have never been shills for anyone. We would just never allow that. And Buffalo Trace didn't pay us the advance. Wiley paid us the advance, and now all the royalties. So, there you go.
Understood. So, Mr. Paul Pacult, we are unfortunately at time. So there are questions, of course, that I still have yet to answer, but we'll have to have you back to ask those.
I'd be happy to be back anytime, David. It's been a total joy.
Thank you so much, Paul. Hang on with me for just a moment after I end the recording, just to close things out. As mentioned in the show notes, there will be links, of course, to Paul's website, to where you can find the books, where you can find his writing. And I encourage you to pick up both the 3rd edition of Kindred Spirits, Buffalo Barrels, and Bourbon. And with that, thank you all for listening. Rate and subscribe, review wherever you can, and I'll see you all next week. Hey folks, thanks for listening to another episode of the Whiskey Ring podcast. If you like what you hear, please go ahead and click that subscribe, follow, or like button. Leave a rating and review on your podcast app of choice, and let me know what you want to hear. You can reach out to me through the podcast apps or email me at david@whiskeyinmyweddingring.com with any suggestions or ideas for new show guests. You can also support the podcast at patreon.com/whiskeyinmyweddingring. That's whiskey with an E, for as little as $1 a month. $5 a month gets you access to bonus content, including our soon-to-resume Under the Influencer series, and $25 a month means you join the Barrel Share Club. Each month, Barrel Share Club members get to try products sent to me for review, bottles from my own collection, and sometimes bottles that I just pick up because they're fun or interesting. Right now, only 5 spots remain in the Barrel Share Club, so grab your place today. Finally, please follow on Instagram. You can follow me at Whiskey in My Wedding Ring or at Whiskey Ring Podcast. You can follow me on Twitter at Whiskey Ring. You can follow on Facebook at Whiskey in My Wedding Ring or join the Facebook group, the Whiskey Ringers Group. And I hope to see you there. Cheers, thank you for the support, and see you next time.